Thank you for coming back and joining us in our series of web conversations. Today we have Dr. Kevin Snyder, and I am David Stollman, co-founder and president of CampusSpeak. And as I said, these conversations we will have every couple weeks and put them out for some good food for thought and some deep dives into some of the expertise of our speakers that are able to go out and work with your communities. Today, we're fortunate to have a longtime friend, Dr. Kevin Snyder, and a little bit about Kevin. Um, Whether he's speaking to students, faculty, staff, or campus leaders, he engages audiences with a very dynamic blend of storytelling, humor, actionable takeaways, and all based in research. His programs are uniquely a match of lived experiences that he's been able to navigate with depression, eating disorder, and surviving sexual violence. Along with decades of campus leadership and prevention work, he sparks authentic conversations that engage and educate students and empower them. Kevin earned his doctorate in student affairs and has served in multiple higher ed locations. He's served as dean of students and as faculty. He's presented to over 1,500 audiences in just the education space and in all 50 states, which I think is pretty cool because that's just not an easy feat. Many other countries as well, and he's inspired millions of people. One fun fact is that not only has Kevin been able to serve in many roles in the administration of universities, but also as volunteer of his fraternity that has helped to shape him in deep and impactful ways, Delta Tau Delta, and has a fun fact of winning big on The Price is Right, a lifelong dream. Kevin, it's good to have you here with us. And it's
Thanks, David.
interesting when your background is sort of laid out there. You sit at the intersection of a lot of different threads of both issues and experience addressing those issues, seeing those
Right.
issues. And you worked many years in higher education supporting students through all sorts of things, some of which you had been navigating yourself at the same time. And, I want to just sort of take you back. And I know we have a lot of campus-based professionals who may be looking through those same lenses, that they're supporting so many students and sometimes some of the things that they themselves are navigating. And so just to start with that, what was that like? I mean, this was a long career in that role. And what was that experience like for you?
Absolutely. I was passionate about higher education and I wanted to work in student affairs because I wanted to be like the dean of students who helped me. I struggled my first year, and it was through students, listening to them, doing campus workshops. And by the way, too, I'm not a natural speaker, so don't judge me. But repetition is the mother of skill. I'm also not a naturally motivated person. So everything I share with my audiences, I admit, I still struggle. But I felt a calling to kind of share my story, and I found a way over the years to use it for good. Because, as you mentioned, whether depression, diagnosed with an eating disorder, my experience as a male survivor of sexual assault, I never talked about those issues. I didn't know how. I carried that weight with me, but it was because of students sharing with me their stories, inspiring me, telling, I had empathy. I was a good listener, and I could relate to them in ways they did not even understand yet. So I credit the students who I've been able to meet through presentations and through campuses as well. I mean, I started off speaking with CampusSpeak how many years ago? And I was working on a campus full time. I worked on a couple campuses. So it was through speaking and also my own campuses where the students just hearing their stories inspired me to finally want to share mine. Because I knew there was a way with the speaking platform to help them not feel so alone like I did. And if I had heard, I remember the first time I ever in college did not feel quite so alone was Judge Mitch Crane, and he was a CampusSpeak speaker. And I still remember it was 1996, and I remember something that I didn't remember exactly what he shared, but I felt a connection to him. And that was kind of the beginning. Maybe a seed was planted that, okay, maybe not now, but when I'm ready, I can share part of my story as well. So honored that I'm able to do that now full time, and honored to still be with Campus Speak, traveling around the country, helping students and faculty and staff equip and empower their culture and their organizations and their students for positive change.
I want to pull the layers because there are three in particular deep buckets that are challenges, and I know you personally came through. They're intertwined. Depression and eating disorders and the sexual assault surviving are interrelated issues
Yeah.
in many ways, but you address them and they came sort of front and center for, as they say, speak from the not the wound but the scar, that you were in a place to be able to
Right.
talk about these things at different times. Can you talk about that kind of evolution of you being in a place to be able to address and with that, the weight of that silence before you're able to kind of verbalize and address these things? It's a very layered story, your story.
Yeah, and sometimes for me it's a heavy lift. I mean, I was just actually talking to my parents a couple of nights ago, thanking them. I'm alive today for two reasons: the unconditional love of my mom and my dad, as a youth, doing things for me. I mean, I was diagnosed with depression back in the '80s. I'm an old guy now, and
Last century.
yeah, and I remember the doctor's office when my mom had pulled me out of school because she was concerned. I'd lost over 30 pounds in less than a month. I'd basically shut down. But my point is, I'm alive today because of that support and that unconditional love. I'm also alive today because of professional counseling. And although I recovered, I had it took time. But I knew that even working through it, and because the doctors had said we've never treated, because I remember the doctor's office, we've never treated a young adolescent boy with depression. And we only thought an eating disorder could happen in girls. And I remember that moment, being in that office, feeling, I mean, I already felt alone. I already felt unnormal. Imagine hearing that. And that didn't help. I mean, it made me feel like I was a kind of a research monkey. Like, what is going on? Why me? Why am I so different? And although I recovered on the outside, on the inside, I still struggled tremendously. And I carried that with me, to college. And I never talked about it. I mean, why would I? I didn't want anybody to know. I saw college as a clean slate. And I can share more about this, that maybe one of those tipping points that made me want to talk about it finally, about at least my depression, about mental health. I started off being very passionate just to talk to people about mindset and about resilience, right? To kind of take mental health and give it an uplifting spin. So we can talk about that if you like a little bit more, but I didn't open up about my own sexual assault experience until 2019, 20 years later. And I do wish I would have opened up sooner. I wasn't ready. And there was a tipping point there too, where I made the choice to finally open up, and be able to use my lived experience, to use that mess and help create a message that, again, could help maybe inspire other people, youth, professionals. Because at the time, I didn't feel that there was a male voice. And that was what inspired me the most, was there was not a male voice talking about sexual assault, and specifically prevention. So that's why I talk about that now.
Well, yeah, let's look at these tipping points, and maybe you could pull some commonalities because there were different tipping points, and it wasn't just the environment around; it was you. What were, if you could describe, each of these tipping points that brought you forward to a place where you could address this more, more openly, and are there themes, or are there what can we learn? So someone who's listening to this who may be in a similar circumstance can look around and analyze their scenario and say, you know what, I am at that tipping point, and I want the courage to step forward and take that next step rather than, like you said, wishing that 10 years or maybe more hadn't gone by before really addressing it that way.
Stigmas exist because of silence. And the only way to change the conversation around whether it's mental health, whether it's about masculinity, whether it's about consent or sexual assault prevention, we can't change the conversation and can't change the culture unless we have those conversations. And that's one of the things I feel is most impactful is when we inspire people to share their story. Again, it becomes that ripple effect of positive change where we normalize the conversation about any of those topics, if not all of them. And for me, I mean, again, it was students who inspired me, not just in conversations in my offices or in student workshops I was doing, but also in my research. Again, I was inspired to understand the science of motivation. And I remember when I was pursuing my doctorate degree at the University of Central Florida, shout out Knights, I remember reading an article about positive psychology and this term called self-efficacy, which is your belief system. And it was like a lightning bolt that hit me. And I knew that is the framework which I want to better understand about not just where our thoughts come from, but how we can foster positive belief. And through my research, I did a qualitative dissertation. Through my research, hearing the stories of other students and what they had overcome. And they were basically strangers in a way. I mean, I knew them a little bit, but hearing their stories about overcoming anxiety, depression, sexual assault, they were all first generation students as well. And many of them were struggling with imposter syndrome. They were the first in their family to go to college. But hearing their stories, they had no clue how much we had in common. And it was a specific presentation, and I'll land this plane right here. It was a specific presentation where in the moment, I was presenting to an audience of students, and I made just this, I had this gut kind of feeling of, I want to open up for the very first time about my depression at 12 years old and my eating disorder. I also threw in a little story about being arrested at 16. That's a whole nother story. But there was a young girl named Kelly who came up to me afterward and said, thank you. She was crying. I thought the meeting planner would boo me off. I thought the audience would boo me off stage. I thought the meeting planner would ask for their money back because they didn't expect that kind of message. But it was the most I've ever felt connected to an audience, by being that vulnerable. And when Kelly, when she said thank you and there was a tear and she ran away, I got an email from her the next morning saying, I came to this event because I had a plan of taking my life when I got home. And I didn't want my friends to come find me and ask me where I was. This was a conference. So she had a hotel room and she had a plan. And she said, just hearing your story about what you've gone through helped me not feel alone for the very first time in my life.
Wow. Wow.
And that's where again, that tipping point hit me of why am I not wanting to use my story for good? Because when I use it, and that's what I kind of needed ultimately, was to find a way to give my experience new meaning and purpose. I believe at least nothing has meaning except the meaning we give it. And what we all have in common is we've experienced adversity in a variety of different ways. So how can we use those experiences for good to help others who may not have experienced them yet or who might be in the middle of it? So that was where that tipping point of wanting to just talk more about mental health came from. And I had the science behind it. I definitely had the purpose in the mission. I felt ready. So
Wow. All right, I want to shift gears a little bit, just because we started with some heavy stuff, but you're really funny when you're working with audiences, even when you're dealing with heavy content, that you're able to weave in not just personal stories in a way that will connect with an audience, that will empower an audience to connect with their own personal stories. But you're able to mix humor in how you do that. And like that's a tough tightrope to walk, to carry such heavy topics, but to be able to add light and humor in a way that makes it more human. And I'm curious, just from behind the scenes, how do you do that? How I know there's a very deliberate approach, but how do you do that while still honoring such powerful topics?
I treat every speech, think of it like a heartbeat, right? And if a speech is not crafted to have a heartbeat where there's highs and lows, and I call them accelerated learning techniques, where there's specific things that we do that aren't gimmicky, but they're ways to pull an audience in and keep their attention. And, for example, often I might come on stage, I have my own walk-up music for Don't Stop Believing, and, that song by Journey, the best song ever made. But I use that to set the tone, don't stop believing. The number one determinant of our success is what we believe. And that's also one of the biggest challenges. So the point is, from the immediate, we get the audience involved. And then I introduce the concept of, we all experience self-doubt. And when we believe in our doubts and doubt our beliefs, that then sparks where we feel something's missing or we feel unfulfilled. Self-doubt is real, and it can be brutal. When I was 12 years old, I was diagnosed with depression. And then I go into just a small part of my story. So within literally that first minute of a presentation, I've got, hopefully, the audience waving, the audience smiling, we're like, all right, who is this guy? And then 1 minute later, they don't expect Mr. Motivation, is someone who battled depression. And I feel if I had started being more open and authentic and really just vulnerable, I always feel like I was authentic, but being more vulnerable about some of the things I didn't ever really want to talk about or know how to, looking back, I would have been able to connect to so much more effectively connect with audiences. But it took me some time to know kind of how to do that and how to structure a presentation. My Price is Right story that you mentioned. Yeah, that was my dream, to be on The Price is Right. But what people don't understand with that story is The Price is Right was actually counseling ordered. Because my counselor asked me, she says, Kevin, is there one thing that you can look forward to every single day? Just where you can mentally escape, get away from your own thoughts. And I came back to her the next session and I said, I found something. What if I watched The Price is Right? And she looked at me and said, great, watch more TV, which a kid doesn't normally hear. But, and then I go into my Price is Right story, and Mom and I go into the grocery store. She's shopping for groceries. What do you think I'm doing? I'm price checking. A 16-year-old should not know the price of Metamucil or prune juice. And so I take them through that full story, my Price is Right, and it's like stand-up comedy. And then I play the video, and people can see me winning and getting on stage. But the callback is, I lived a dream because I had one. And if a young boy with depression can grow up to become a motivational speaker and live his dream, I'm just living proof of what's possible. So there's a lot of play with that story. And I think, David, I've shared that story in most of my presentations. Now it's more succinct than it's ever been because I do have a lot more content, but I love that story because it has all those elements of a great story in it. There's humor, there's hopefully inspiration to it, there's living proof example, the video. So things like that, I love, and I look for opportunities in every single speech, in all the different sections and segments to not be a talking head, but to pull the audience in, get the students on stage, get the professionals on stage, getting active volunteers, multimedia, things like that.
Yeah. Wow. And it's almost like an origin story too for the superhero style. That does take back to a keystone piece of who you are and how you see the world through that, through that approach of dealing with your own, challenges and having a structure. And it lays out a lot of, in many ways, what you teach. It's tangible and it's real and it's accessible. And there's excitement to it and success.
Yeah.
I want to, because part of what you mentioned before, I wanted to harken back to this idea. There weren't many male survivors. There weren't many male survivors talking. And, kind of like when you were a child and they identified an eating disorder and they gendered it. Sexual violence and sexual assault for many years has also been in many ways gendered because of the skewed statistics of who typically does and who typically is a survivor of. And with this, I know when Campus Speak started, our work with masculinity, and National Masculinity Week, you were one of the people I called, and right away you were like, "I'm all in. What can I do? How can I help? How can I
Yeah.
participate? How can I make, men better?" Because I think, you reflected back to me that you know, you walked into a role of being a man and realized that the tools weren't always there for men to be able to live that ideal of masculinity as expected. Where that paradox that you've talked about. And so I wanted to, since I know this is a passion of you to sort of walk through first a little bit about that perspective of masculinity and where we might be hurting men. And then from there, talk a little bit about that unique experience as sort of realizing you're one of few male survivors, and what that's like talking about that and sharing that experience from a stage. So if you could start with and go through those two issues, I think it'll be very informative.
Right. Yeah. I remember, and it was 2019, the Me Too movement, and it seemed like there was a daily news alert about yet another celebrity or actor or someone, comedian, that had felt, or someone had felt like they had sexually either harassed them or assaulted them. And it was overwhelming. I was so, I almost had the opposite of I almost had some learned helplessness creep in. I was like, I cannot believe this is so prevalent. But every day when I heard of these issues, I heard and saw women courageously speak up. And that is what inspired me to. Yet I felt, because of my own lived experience, that male voice was missing. And I didn't know how to talk about it. In fact, nobody even knew. I had to sit my wife down. I had to meet with my parents and say, hey, I think I'm going to write an article revealing my story. And I wasn't even sure how to give it meaning, but I just wanted other men, I wanted other women to know that males can experience this too. And my experience was, it was another male had lured me, drugged me, and took advantage of me. And it, again, I didn't reveal anything until about 20 years later, but I'm so glad that I did. And in 2023, I was actually coaching some speakers at a TEDx event, and there were some issues with their preparation. And then the event organizer asked me if I would present a talk on, the theme was body, mind, and soul. And that was a moment where I had to dig real deep, kind of like the experience with Kelly that I mentioned earlier. And that's for the very first time I opened up about, in a speaking platform, that was the very first time that I ever spoke about sexual assault. Because the article that I wrote, and I credit you all and the Campus Speak team for allowing me to do that. But it was the article. The speech with TEDx was something completely different. And the amount of emails that I've received and the comments on the YouTube for that video and just other things of that nature just remind me that as men, I feel like we have a duty to talk about, not just mental health, but, sexual assault as well. So that male voice, I'm I think can be extremely impactful.
Yeah, that's and necessary.
Yeah.
Um, I want you to share a little bit about, because I know we've had some pretty in-depth conversations about this masculinity issue and the topic, and how we we as a culture are putting our boys and young men especially into very challenging circumstances of expectations and a lack of skill sets and a framework around them, holding them to a standard and that can be very unhealthy. And this idea that was out there for a while, this toxic masculinity, as opposed to just there's masculinity, and there's many different men in many different ways that express it, and there are
Right.
behaviors that are dangerous and bad and horrible, but that's not attributable to masculinity. Quite to the contrary. And I know we've talked about this, and I know that this plays into your work in particular. So I'd love for you to share a little bit of more, of your thoughts on that paradox.
Right. Yeah. The concept or the assumption that if we talk about it, we're weak. That's the challenge, and that's what we have to break through. Again, the stigmas on that exist because of silence, because we are not talking about it. So I think, especially as men, we can even inspire women to talk about it. I don't look at this topic as gender specific. I'm just a male talking about my own lived experience. The reality is, by talking about it, we're powerfully strong, and that's how we change the conversation. For some campuses, they've never even brought in a speaker who's talked about this topic, and that's why they should. Mm-hmm. There's so many layers. I remember a story when I was a sophomore. I just joined my fraternity, and you mentioned Delta Tau Delta, but it doesn't matter what fraternity I'm a member of, as it relates to this story. I joined a fraternity because the dean of students, when I went to the dean to have with a withdrawal form, I was going to quit college. He refused to sign it. He says, "Kevin, how can we help? What do you need?" Now, he didn't get caught up in the policies and the paperwork. He shut the door and asked how he could help. And because my grades were pretty good, that's about all I did. I wasn't engaged. I went home every weekend. Long story short, he encouraged me. He goes, "Your grades are pretty good, so I'm not going to encourage you to go to class. I'm going to encourage you to get involved on campus. Find an organization or two that you can get involved with." Well, I found a couple. I went through recruitment and for the free food at Golden Corral one time. And I'll never forget meeting some guys that talked about their values. I played sports growing up, but none of my sports buddies, we didn't talk about truth, courage, faith, power, right? And I thought there's something different about this group. So I kind of vetted them out. A couple of the guys I met at the gym, and I knew some other people from classes, and I thought these guys seem different. Even talked to some sorority girls, which, the sorority women are some of the best recruitment, for fraternities, because they know the good guys, right? And point is this: I joined the fraternity, and one of the first things that we did as a brotherhood was we went on basically a camping retreat getaway. And the first night, we're sitting around the campfire, and we're pulling out, they call them these brotherhood building cards, where you pull out a card and there's a question on it, and you read the question out loud. You don't know what the question's going to be until it's your turn, but you read the question out loud, and then you answer it. And again, I was there. Nobody knew. I was not open about my own depression. I mean, I was just excited to feel like I fit in somewhere, right? And I feel like a lot of new students, especially first year students or second year, so much of what they want. Yeah, they don't want to disappoint mom or dad. They want to do well academically, but they want to fit in. They want to belong somewhere. And I've spoken at so many new member orientations and recruitment type events where, we have to, make sure that we also don't, we're careful with that, because they want to fit in so much. They might do things they might not normally do individually, but in a group setting, they might. So we have to make sure that we're doing the right things. Anyways, nobody in the fraternity knew about my depression, my eating disorder, even being arrested. And I didn't want them to know. Why would I say this? Why would I tell people? Again, college for me, I was hoping would be a clean slate. but I still carried that weight. First night of the campfire, I take my Brotherhood building card, I look at it, and it says, "What are you most proud of?" Took a couple swallows, and I thought, I can't believe that I'm about to tell this group of guys, some of which I don't even know yet, about how much I've struggled and how weak I've been. I felt inspired. I've had a lot of moments in my life where I felt just inspired in the moment, and I've trusted that. And I'm glad that I have, because those have been turning points in my life. And I'll never forget telling them about, I didn't go deep into the story, but I just let them know I'm most proud of being alive. Let them know about my depression, my eating disorder, because I'm lucky to be alive, and I feel confident to say that. And I'll never forget, around this campfire, one of the guys that was, to me at least, was the most intimidating. His name, Ron Miller, still remember him. And I thought he was going to come up to me, kick me out of the group, maybe even kick my butt, and be like, "We don't want, wussies like you here. We're up." And he didn't. He gave me first a chest bump of brotherly affection, and then he actually gave me a hug in front of everybody. And as he did that, he whispered in my ear, "It's the bravest thing I've ever heard." And later on that night, and through that weekend, and through in the days and weeks after, these other men, these other brothers of mine, came up individually to talk with me, just to say, "Thank you for sharing your story. You've inspired us, or inspired me, to share mine." So again, none of us are alone. None of us are immune, and we never know what someone might be going through. So that experience there helped me to kind of reframe how I thought about, masculinity, and what is, because it is a kind of an individual definition. There are some people that would define masculinity as strong, and you don't show weakness, you don't talk. Well, I want to show people that you can be stronger by talking about it, by sharing what you've gone through, because the mess can be the message. Don't know if this is making much sense. I hope it is. But that campfire experience literally changed my life. I never went back to the dean of students with the withdrawal form. I kept my good grades, but I also got extremely involved on campus. And by my senior year, I'm actually working for admissions, giving campus tours to tell prospective students and parents how great this campus was. Yeah. Not that awards matter, but I earned the Greek Man of the Year award. I earned Homecoming King award, and I degree. I'm actually going to go work in student affairs. I love the campus environment. And that's what inspired me to even get into student affairs.
It's not surprising. I know you speak passionately about the, fraternity and sorority experience and what it should be and what it can be. And I think that it makes a lot of sense based on the role that it was able to play in you, in first step, finding your people, finding belonging, but then also empowering you to be able to, it seems like more than once you've looked down, realized you're at the doorstep of something and said, "I think this is what I need to step through this door," and had the courage to do that. And each time, it sounds like it's been a rewarding transition of being able to, like you said, those tipping points, being able to engage at the right time with the right people. It's a powerful opportunity.
Yeah, a fun metaphor and a true metaphor. Think of it like skydiving. Whether we've been skydiving or not, it's a great example. Most people, when they're up in that plane, for whatever reason, maybe they lost a bet, maybe it's a bucket list item, or and I use this example in my presentations. Is imagine you're 13,000 feet up, and you're looking down, and the doors have opened, and you're strapped to somebody that you don't know. And you're jumping out or getting pushed out. Like, why would you jump out of a perfectly good plane? Most people, they're numb, they're scared. I know for me, I was screaming, "No, I've changed my mind." And, there's a window of opportunity in skydiving, but also in life. There's a window of opportunity. And if we don't take that leap or that jump, we'll be in the exact same place. And when I went skydiving, it was in DeLand, Florida, because at the time I was working at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University in Daytona.
Sure.
And, there's a window of opportunity. And if you don't jump out at the right time, you're probably going to land where you don't want to land. And anyways, within 10 seconds of me falling out or being pushed out, strapped to somebody I didn't even know, I went from numb and scared and wanting to quit, why am I doing this, to this is the most exciting thing I've ever done in my life. And, falling down another 30 to 45 seconds, the parachute opens, we land. And what do you think I wanted to do once we landed?
Go right back up.
Go do it again. So when we feel that fear, when we feel that discomfort, we need to embrace that, because I think that's where we'll inspire not just ourselves to do it again, but inspire other people to do it. And again, that's that ripple effect. A lot of times we think we might live in a comfort zone. I actually think a lot of us live in a discomfort zone, and that's why it can be difficult to change. I mean, people don't fear uncertainty; they don't fear change. They feel the uncertainty that change can represent. So anyway, skydiving is just a great example. I love using that because it's a fun metaphor. And when I ask skydivers in the audience, 9.9 times out of 10, what did you want to do when you landed? Guess what they say? Wanted to do it again. So how do we apply that to life? How do we apply that to culture change? Conversation.
It's interesting. Your story, you started as, someone that was going to quit, and then next touring people around to get them to join you there, and then entering into a career of, basically getting to a dean's office and serving. And I know now professionally, not just in the education space, but outside, you do a lot of work with HR audiences. And I am not at all surprised by that when I think about what many deans of students deal with. And, it's really in many ways, you're serving the needs of both other administrators, and in doing so, sometimes directly students, and sometimes it's those other administrators to be able to serve those students. And, I see from my vantage point a lot of overlap in that you empower those that serve others. And to do it more authentically, and to do it, with a deeper connection to both their own person and using that as a vehicle to serve others. And I see that overlap, but I would love to hear, because I know on campuses, many times people are booking you to speak directly to their students, but sometimes it's faculty and staff. Sometimes it's not just that student audience that you're there to impact. And I'm wondering how that, the professional speaking and consulting, again, a lot of that HR, how that overlaps, and how those work in two audiences inform each other and make you more successful in both.
Love that the question and the topic here, because when I go to a campus and I'm not speaking, I actually offer myself, hey, you've got me all day, right? So if it's a student event, student leadership event, orientation, fraternity story life event, or an event on mental health, violence prevention, hey, let me also talk to your staff. Let me talk to the faculty as well. With my doctorate degree and the fact that I'm a former dean of students and student affairs professional, and I've taught in the classroom, I kind of have some different perspectives, and I kind of know how to speak maybe some different languages. So I love it when, and often I have to offer that. They're not thinking that. They're thinking of their check. We got to get this event and got to figure out the logistics. Good, we got a speaker for this. Well, good. Now, can I also talk to the dean of students office, offer myself to, or talk to one of the deans, academic deans, or the provost. I love it when there's faculty staff professional development days. They typically do those where there's chancellor updates or president updates. Those are great opportunities. I'll speak for the faculty staff, but let me speak to the students while I'm there as well. And you're right, there is so much overlap. We all have to be self-motivated to do what we do. And there's a lot of storytelling that goes into my presentations. And so if I'm talking to professionals or if I'm talking to students, I look at a speech kind of like puzzles. Every puzzle has a vision that you're accomplishing, and you're moving puzzle pieces around. The concepts are fairly universal, but the stories that carry the message have to be unique and relevant, for that group. And with my research too, one of the things I love to share with faculty, the students who were equipped and empowered the most to believe in themselves, because again, the research participants in my self-efficacy research about belief, they were first generation college students. They were the first in their family. They were the pioneers. Half them didn't even feel supported by their family because their families were challenging them. Like, why? Do you think you're better than us? That was literally some of the students. So where do the students find that support? Where did they find that, that community? Found it through staff and faculty. So, that's just an example too, where I love, that social persuasion, that verbal persuasion. Sometimes we need others to believe in us and express that so that we can believe in ourselves. Can I share a quick story about that? I'll make it brief.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I'll never forget English 101, Dr. LaVon Adams. First assignment in college, she said to the class, and this goes back to 1994 for me, but I share that only to let the viewers and listeners here know it still is memorable for me. It changed. It was another one of those tipping points that changed my life and why I'm an author today, because she said, write a topic, a 3-page paper, anything that you want, double space, 1-inch margins. Well, critical writing assignment, I write it on The Price is Right.
Of course.
I go to the writing center 2 different times. I write this paper. I still have all this self-doubt. I'm like, I don't write well. I don't test well. I remember what I got on the SAT. Long story short, about a week later, she's passing out the papers one by one in the classroom, So it's like, don't make eye contact. Don't make eye contact. Because you could tell how she lays the paper down, maybe how well you did. I open up the paper and it says, see me after class. Right? So I go to see her after class. She holds up a copy of my paper in front of my face and says, Kevin, in all my years of teaching, this is one of the best papers I've ever read. But you have a problem. You're obsessed with this show. And of course, she didn't know my story. I taught, it was a 3-page paper on how great The Price is Right was and a vicarious experience and why people love watching it, why the contestants, why you yell at the TV. Nothing about how Price is Right was kind of counselor ordered. But when Dr. Adams told me that I was really good at writing, what do you think happened? It made me believe maybe I am good at writing. And then I had to admit to her, I said, well, Dr. Adams, I kind of feel like I cheated because I got help. I took this to the writing center twice. And she says, Kevin, no, that even shows more commitment and you're resourceful. That's going to be more of your success story. And Dr. Adams hadn't told me that I was really good at writing, I would have believed that inner head trash and that inner propaganda in my head. It took somebody like her to help me realize that maybe I am good at writing, which is what inspired me to want to write my first book, which introduces my story about some of the things I've dealt with. So
I love it. I love it. Well, I know you, like I said in the beginning, sit at the intersection of so many important topics and do it in a way where you're able to engage professionals and the students, especially that they serve, to make them better. And, one of the things that I always say about, great programs is, a speaker, the ones that we love working with are the ones that students leave the room better because they spent that time. And I know that's the case with you because you put it all out there. You put yourself and you do it in such a professional way to make sure that those students and professionals leave better. Always proud that you're with us and appreciate you opening up and sharing so much here. I know this is a part of our series that, people will be coming back to watch the next one and the next one, but I know this time we were able to share is going to make people better for having heard it. And I always appreciate our association and proud to work with you. Thank you.
Thank you. And even when I was a meeting planner working in student affairs, I only hired CAMPUSPEAK speakers for a reason. So
I love it. Well, everyone, see you soon. And I think a couple weeks you'll see our next episode. But again, thank you to Dr. Kevin Snyder. He's available for you to come and inspire and impact your audiences. And we hope you reach out to us to set that up.